My son informed me that he didn't want me at his wedding because his fiancée's family felt I didn't appear wealthy enough, so I happily stayed away. However, they were unaware that I was the one who secured the venue for them, so I sent a letter delivering this unfortunate news instead. Hello Reddit, this is my first time posting here since I need some help, and it's a bit urgent. This matter is too personal to share with my friends, so I'm posting it here. I, 52, have been a single mother to my son, and have raised him on my own since he was born. My husband unfortunately passed away while I was pregnant with him. He had an aneurysm in his sleep, and by the time I woke up he was gone. Since then, I have raised my son on my own and have honestly sacrificed a lot, something that other single parents can also attest to. I'm not saying that he owes anything to me because I'm his mother, but a little appreciation would be nice. Unfortunately, he ended up telling me that he did not want me to attend his wedding a couple of days ago because apparently according to his and her family, I did not look like I was rich enough to fit in with the kind of people that would be present there. That was incredibly hurtful, so I did something really underhanded as well. That's really not in my nature, but I just couldn't help myself. All of this started 2 years ago, when he first started dating Zoe. He met her through friends from what I know, and she belongs to quite a wealthy family. Her parents own one of the top real estate firms in the state, and they are pretty much rolling in money. She looks the part as well, always dressed in luxury brands from head to toe, and she owns 3 cars herself. In comparison, I obviously look like a peasant since I'm just an economics professor in college. I do make a decent amount of money, and it has been good enough for me and my son. That's how I've been able to pay all the bills and the rent, and afford to be able to raise him single-handedly for the past 25 years. At least. It used to be good enough for us until he started dating Zoe, and then things started changing and getting weird between us. Just for the record, I never had a problem with his relationship with Zoe or her as a person until recently, even though after the first time we met my son called me up later on to tell me that I needed to start changing certain things about my house so that it looked better. He had said that the fact that most of the furniture in my house looked really old was pretty embarrassing for him since he had been to Zoe's parents' mansion, and it was crazy how beautiful and shiny everything was. He wanted me to at least put an effort into making my home look better. We had a fight after the first meeting because I did not think that there was anything wrong with the way my house looked. The fact that certain things were really old just meant that they had character. I did not want a shiny, glamorous lifestyle like Zoe or her parents because I knew that I could not afford it, and I wanted to live within my means. I was perfectly happy with how my life was and did not have any complaints. So he had no reason to be complaining about it either. Some of the things that he wanted me to replace, like some furniture and stuff, had actually been picked out by my late husband, and I really valued them. We got into a fight back then, and I told him that if he was so embarrassed of me, then maybe he shouldn't have introduced me to his rich girlfriend in the first place. He realized that he was being a jerk and apologized to me later, and we were able to patch things up. But after that, he never brought Zoe over to my place, and I only met her a handful of times. I met her parents once when they got engaged, and I attended the party that they threw. Even then, my son had a lot to say about the way that I was dressed, and he said that it was an engagement party, so I should have put more effort into how I dressed. But according to me, I was dressed perfectly fine. I'm not stupid. I could tell that his real problem was the fact that I was not dressed in luxury brands, and was just wearing things that I could afford. But I guess he was too afraid to say it anyway. I tried not to mind that. And even though he had started being very distant from me ever since he had introduced Zoe to me, I still tried to keep in touch with him, But then 3 days ago, he visited me and told me that after Zoe and her parents had met me at the engagement party, they did not think that I would fit in with the crowd that would be present at their wedding, since it would be mostly their friends and other business associates who worked with their parents, but none of his family members. Since Zoe's parents were funding most of it, he thought that it would be better for him to respect their wishes. He even said that he would have a private ceremony later on, and I would be invited to that. But for now, he just wanted me to understand where he was coming from because ultimately he did not want me to feel out of place. I was very hurt when he said that, and I started crying. But then he got really exasperated and said that there was nothing worth crying over. This was just a fact that I did not look rich enough to fit in there, and he did not want me to embarrass either myself or him. He told me that he had hoped that I would understand, but I was just being selfish by not caring about his image in front of his in-laws. Once I stopped crying, I told him to get out of my house and never come back. He tried to argue, but I just screamed at him and asked him to leave. Once that was done, I was still pretty upset. So I decided to do something that I'm not sure was the right move or not. A couple of weeks ago, I had actually helped him get the venue that he wanted for his wedding. When I called him to check up on him a couple of weeks back, he had been telling me that he was struggling to finalize the venue. Apparently, the place that he wanted was something that Zoe had her mind set on, and it was not something that had been listed in the property that their wedding organizers had shown them, but it was a really beautiful place a little out of the city. However, the owner was not willing to put it up for rent and had refused to let them get married there. He had been trying to negotiate with his person for ages along with Zoe's parents, but he just refused to give it up, no matter how much money they offered him. Zoe was equally stubborn. She had refused to even consider any other place, and now there were just a couple of weeks to go for the wedding. And they had even sent out invitations with that address printed on them on Zoe's insistence. But they still hadn't been able to finalize the place, and were still trying to negotiate with the owner. When he told me the name of the owner, I realized I knew this person. I realized I used to go to college with this guy, and I immediately thought that maybe I could help him out, but I wanted it to be a surprise. So I just told him I was sorry about it and hoped that things would work out for him somehow. Then I decided to reach out to this guy somehow. And after speaking to him for a couple of days, I figured that the reason he was not willing to rent out his property for any events was because he and his wife were worried that if they allowed events to be held there, the people hosting would trash the place. It had happened a couple of times before, so they did not want that to happen and wanted to preserve the natural beauty of their property. But I told him that this was my son that we were talking about, and since he knew me personally, I could vouch for the fact that none of this was going to happen. On top of that, Zoe's parents were also the owners of the top real estate firm, so he did not need to worry about whether the place would get trashed or not. It took me a while, but after a few days I was finally able to convince him, and he agreed to speak to my son. I was also able to convince him not to mention my name, because I wanted to tell them about it after the wedding and surprise them myself. Anyway, once I was able to convince him, he agreed to it, and my son was really happy. He did not have any idea I was behind all of this, and I guess that was why he was so confident when he told me that I was not wanted at the wedding. Anyway, after he paid me that visit, I was very hurt, and I decided to call the owner of the place. I explained to him what had happened just now. I did not intend to overshare, but I was so upset, I just ended up telling him everything, and he literally had to comfort me, even though we are not particularly close. But he and his wife were really kind to me and told me that they were going to back out of the deal because they did not think they wanted to have anything to do with such an ungrateful person. I thanked them, and the very next day they told me that they had returned the money they had taken in advance and had informed them that they would no longer be able to rent out their property to them, so they had to look for someplace else. Zoe's parents had apparently been furious and had even threatened to sue them, but they said they did not care about any of it. After all that happened, I sat in my living room, staring into space, trying to understand where I went wrong. As a mother, someone who had given everything to her child, it was crushing to realize he now saw no problem treating me like I was disposable. I raised my son to be kind, respectful, and above all, grateful. But there I was, realizing that all the effort and sacrifices I made seemed to mean nothing to him. The days that followed were filled with bitter thoughts. I couldn't sleep properly, felt restless, and above all, furious. It wasn't just his rejection that hurt. It was the sheer audacity of excluding me from the most important day of his life simply because he found me embarrassing. It was as if all those years of hard work and sacrifices were being dismissed as insignificant. I wasn't one to hold grudges, but something inside me was on the verge of exploding. That's when I started piecing things together. I knew more about the wedding preparations than he probably realized, thanks to everything he had shared with me before uninviting me. While he was busy trying to impress Zoe and her parents, I had been pushed to the sidelines, but I was still paying attention. For instance, I remember the florist they hired was a friend of one of my colleagues. I called her, started an innocent conversation, and learned that Zoe had requested ridiculously expensive imported flowers that hadn't been paid for yet. Armed with this information, I started thinking about how I could cause some disruption without raising suspicion. I contacted the decorator, pretending to be part of the wedding planning team, and claimed the date had been postponed due to logistical issues. He wasn't happy about it, but he agreed to cancel the scheduled deliveries. I knew that without flowers and decorations, the wedding venue would look like a mess. And I wasn't done yet. There was also the catering. From what I remembered, Zoe had mentioned during casual conversation that the menu was inspired by something she saw in a luxury magazine. I called the restaurant responsible and asked about the plans. It turned out they hadn't received the final payment yet, and since the owner was known for being extremely strict about confirmations, any delay meant immediate cancellation. I used that to my advantage. I called the restaurant back, pretending to be a concerned party, and hinted at potential food safety concerns involving their suppliers, which left the owner uneasy. She decided to cancel the order to protect her restaurant's reputation. Meanwhile, I got a message from an acquaintance who worked at the local courthouse, asking if I knew that Zoe's family was trying to sue the original venue owner for backing out of the contract. I laughed. Suing someone over their own arrogance? But the situation gave me an idea. I wrote a detailed letter to the attorney handling the case, explaining everything that had happened, including how I was excluded from the wedding. I requested that the letter be added to the case file, just to make things even more uncomfortable for them. A few days before the wedding, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my son. He sounded desperate, saying everything was going wrong. The caterer canceled, the decorator disappeared, the flowers weren't available, and the backup venue had structural issues. He asked for my help. My help. I took a deep breath and listened to everything he had to say. When he finished, I asked him, "Do you remember when you told me I wasn't good enough for your wedding? That I didn't belong there?" He was silent for a moment before trying to justify himself, but I didn't let him. "You know, I could solve all these problems for you. I could help with the vendors, find a new venue, and make this right. But do you know what I'm going to do? Nothing. I'm going to sit back and let you and your fiancé deal with the consequences of your actions." He started pleading, saying he was sorry and that he didn't know what came over him to treat me like that. I interrupted him. "You chose to humiliate me. You chose to exclude me. You aligned yourself with people who have zero respect for me. Now you're going to face this alone." On the wedding day, I stayed home, poured myself a glass of good wine, and listened to music. I later heard from a friend, who knew someone who attended the event, that the wedding was a complete disaster. The last-minute catering served cold, bland food. The venue was poorly decorated, and even Zoe's mother was furious because the photos turned out awful. Apparently, Zoe had a meltdown in the middle of the reception, and the guests were whispering about how amateurish everything seemed for such a wealthy family. Afterward, my son tried to contact me several times, but I didn't answer. He needed to understand that the door he slammed shut might not open again. This wasn't about revenge, it was about respect. I gave him life, sacrificed my dreams so he could have his, and he treated me as if I were invisible. Now he can live with the choices he made. As for me, I'm at peace. For the first time in years, I'm focusing on myself, and it feels liberating. Some time later, life moved on, but the scars of what happened remained. My son tried to reconcile with me multiple times, sending messages, calling, and even showing up at my house unannounced. At first, I ignored him and avoided any contact. I needed space to process the pain and disappointment he had caused me. However, as months went by, I decided to hear him out, not for his sake, but for mine. When we finally talked, he looked visibly worn down. He confessed that the wedding had been a disaster. After the chaos of the event, his relationship with Zoe and her family began to deteriorate rapidly. Zoe, dissatisfied with the mess and embarrassed by the negative fallout, started taking her frustrations out on him. Her parents became even colder toward him, blaming him for what had happened, as if it had been his responsibility to fix everything. He admitted he felt like he would never be good enough for Zoe or her family. And to my surprise, he revealed that the marriage ended just a few months later. Zoe filed for divorce, claiming that he wasn't mature enough for the kind of life she wanted. When he told me this, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But the reality was, he was simply reaping what he had sown. He chose to humiliate and reject me in favor of impressing people who never truly valued him. Now, he was alone, dealing with the consequences. After that, he tried to repair our relationship, saying he finally understood how ungrateful he had been toward me. He admitted that the lack of my emotional support and presence at the wedding had impacted him more than he realized. He said he had finally come to see how I had always been there for him, while Zoe and her family only cared about appearances. I listened, but I made it clear that things would not go back to the way they were. I explained that I was tired of being treated like I was disposable and that he would need to prove he had changed through actions, not just words. He cried, apologized again, and promised to work on rebuilding the trust between us. I decided to give him a chance, but on my terms and at my pace. As for Zoe, from what I've heard through acquaintances, she moved back in with her parents shortly after the divorce. It didn't take long for her to start a new relationship with someone within her family's social circle. They continued to maintain their facade of perfection, as they always had, but it was clear to everyone that the wedding disaster had left a stain on their reputation. Zoe's family had to swallow their pride after the fiasco, but they carried on as if nothing had happened. After all, for them, it was easier to sweep problems under the rug than confront them. And me? For the first time in a very long time, I started focusing on myself. I decided to take a sabbatical from work, something I never thought I would do. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of visiting, reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years, and, most importantly, allowed myself to live without the burden of trying to please everyone. I also started therapy, which helped me process the pain and find peace within myself. My son is still trying to rebuild his life. He moved into a small apartment and is learning how to be independent, ironically something he never appreciated when he had my help. We're talking more now, but things are different. I no longer feel the need to be his constant foundation. I love my son, but I've learned that I can't allow him to treat me disrespectfully, no matter how much I care for him. In the end, I've learned a valuable lesson. Respect must be mutual, even between a mother and son. And as difficult as it was, I feel stronger, more independent, and more at peace than ever before. The world didn't end because of his rejection. On the contrary, my life has finally begun.